Hi, this is Scott, Killer 3-Cylinder on Insight Central, and I'm at Jew Motors today, and I'm going to do a front strut. I'm going to take it out to replace the spring and put in a spring that I make that's a upgraded 30% stiffer spring for the front that doesn't raise the front end. So I'm going to show you how to take a strut out of a car here. To start with, on top, there's the 3 bolts that hold the part of the strut into the strut tower, and also there's this 17 millimeter on the very top of the strut. I like to loosen this up now so that it's ready to come off easier. It's 17 millimeters, and I'm going to back it off about halfway. So it's a little loose right there, but it's safe to do it right here, so when I get it in the spring compressor in a little bit, it'll come off real easy. So I'm going to come back down here to the front. Let me raise the car back up just a little bit. We're going to start with the 32 millimeter axle nut. And I have a special tool that you strike with a hammer, similar to a chisel, and it helps straighten out the edge of the axle nut so that we can get that off there real easy and then reuse it. .32 millimeter socket. We're going to take the axle nut off. Work on disconnecting the tie rod end here, and it has a cotter pin through it. So I'm going to use a pair of cutters, and I'm going to straighten it out a little bit, and we're going to try to save it. If I can't save it, if it doesn't come out successfully, I have some more in the drawer and I can go get one for later. So I'm going to pull my cotter pin. Set that aside. This is a 17 millimeter nut on the end of the tie rod. So you can use the same socket that you used up top, and we're going to take that off. So on tie rod ends, the tie rod end itself, the part that goes in here, is a wedge shape, and it fits very, very tight in there. And a lot of people will pound on these and drive on these, and really the trick is that you're going to use a hammer and you want to strike it from the back edge of the part that it goes into, and the shock wave of that usually when you hit it, it'll pop it apart. You may have to hit it a couple times. There you go, 3 shots and it came apart. The next part that I'm going to do now that that's apart is I'm going to use a 12 millimeter, and I'm going to get the brake caliper out of the way. Also, while we're doing the brake caliper, to have room to get the strut out, the brake hose comes up and there's another 12 millimeter that bolts part of the brake hose to the caliper, or the hose to the strut. So we're going to take that out. Get the bolt out of the way. The other thing that is going to need to come off in a moment, and we take them off and swing them back out of the way, is an ABS sensor. And the ABS sensor is on the back side of the strut back in here, and it has a 10 millimeter bolt here, and we're going to take that out of the way so that we don't stress the cable or tear the cable when we're taking the strut out. And then it's down in a hole, and I'll hold up the sensor here for you, but the sensor comes out of the hole, and it's always good to clean a little bit of debris on them. These are magnetic. Then there's another 10 millimeter bolt over here on the other bracket, and we take that out of the way like this. Set my hardware back, and I like to take the ABS sensor and bring it completely out of the way, and we coil it up just a little bit back here so that it doesn't get damaged, and we hang it off to the side. Now we've also got the caliper ready to come off, so the caliper is going to slide off here, and we've got the hose loose. And it's always recommended not to necessarily just let the caliper dangle, so we're going to use a hook and hook it back to the side out of the way so we're not stressing the hose. The next thing is the sway bar link that's in here. And the sway bar link sometimes has a difficult time. There's a lower connection and an upper connection where it hooks to the sway bar, and the sway bar also hooks to the strut back in here, and it's a 14 millimeter nut in this case. And about an hour ago, I came in and put a couple drops of penetrating oil on the threads, just so that they're easy to get apart, hopefully. If there's not, in the center part of the sway bar link, there's actually a hole in there where you can stick an Allen wrench, or you can stick a hex of sorts, and this is 5 millimeters, and that will go in there. In many cases, you have to put a hex in there and hold it while you use a 14 millimeter device to loosen it. I'm going to try to take the top one loose with the impact gun and hopefully get lucky where it comes completely off. And it came right off. So that was good. The penetrating oil helps on those. If you live in the Midwest or back east, a lot of times these components are very rusty and very, very difficult to get apart. So I've got the sway bar link out, caliper off, tie rod disconnected, ABS sensor out of the way. Now there's two 19 millimeter bolts right here that bolt the strut to the knuckle. These always face forward with the nut on the front side. So we're going to take these out. Take the nuts off. With the caliper out of the way, you can get the deep socket, the deep impact socket on that side of it to loosen it up. So when we pull the strut loose with these bolts, when these bolts are going to slide out of here in a moment, there's a trick with the axle, and you need to be really careful with the axle when it comes out of the hub. These axles on a Honda Insight, in the center, they're a slip yoke where they're designed to slide in and out. But if you pull it out of the joint under the boot, you can't see it, and it happens. So one of the things that we do when we take this apart is I'm going to go ahead and drop the knuckle out of the way a little bit. I've got a couple of zip ties here, and I'm going to start getting the axle, and I'm going to push the axle in a little bit. Hopefully this isn't seized. This car's in pretty good shape, but let's see if I can too hard. Otherwise you may need to stick the nut on, or you may have to grind off the end of the mushroom that you make with the hammer. So this particular one is starting to fight us, so I may have to get another tool to get this out. Well, this is almost like a Midwest deal. Very rusty. All right, so we ended up having to get the air hammer out and really push it back to get it to go in. So I'm going to get the knuckle disconnected here from the stub of the axle. Should slide out. Maybe we'll use the air hammer again with a slightly different punch on the end of it. That's not going to clear. All right, here she comes. So, all right, so I got the axle out, and I'm holding pressure in on the axle so that it doesn't slip out of the inner joint. And back here where the axle and the sway bar are, I'm going to use a couple of zip ties. I really could have just had one, but I have a couple that are already put together. And I'm going to zip tie this axle to the sway bar so that it'll stay in there and not slide out of the middle joint, out of the transmission. So that's in place, held in. So this is loose. On the top side, I'm going to let the lift down just a little bit so that I can get to the three 14 millimeter nuts that are up on top. 3 nuts on top here. All right, so we're loose on top, and now the strut comes out under the fender here, and we have the strut assembly here. So I've got a spring compressor ready to go. I'm going to set the strut in the spring compressor and get this set. And I'm going to go ahead and compress the top hat on the spring a bit. We've already loosened up the 17 millimeter for the most part. So with that compressed, let me grab the tool and take the nut off of it. And I'm going to lift off the nut and the washer and lay them back out of the way. And then I'm going to start easing the pressure off of the spring compressor. There's virtually no pressure at the moment, or very little. Slide the arms back, take off the top cap, and underneath here there's a washer. This is actually a strut bearing. It allows the front suspension to turn. And then we got the cap off the spring. So set those items back. The spring's ready to come off here. On this spring, there's a flat side and the side that has the normal tail on a spring. One thing to check on your spring, on your strut, when you have this apart, is to lift this up and take a look at the condition of this absorber. This is the front suspension absorber. So if everything were to collapse all the way, this is what you bottom out on. So it looks good in this particular case. We're going to put the rubber boot, the bellows, back in. And I've got a spring over here on my toolbox that's ready to go back in place. And on the fronts, these are shorter, but they're 30% stiffer, so they don't change the ride height, but they change the handling and the feel of the car. The tail part of this is the important part when you put this one on, that it goes over, and there's a particular spot on the lower part of the strut here where it has to line up in that little pocket right there. So we're ready to put the rest of the parts back on this. So we put the cap on with the bearing. And it's important with this bearing that when it goes down on, the bearing has to fit onto the piston correctly of the strut. So in this case, I'm going to bring it down and use the spring compressor to push this down and line it up. So there's a shoulder right there, and the shoulder on the piston of the strut lines up in the bearing, and now I can reassemble the other parts that go on top of this. So there's the washer and this cup washer that goes down that protect it from dirt. And we put the top cap back on, and then the washer and the nut. I'm going to tighten this up. Okay, so now this is starting to turn on me a little bit, and there's also a hex or an Allen in the top of the shock or the piston for the shock, and that's a 6 millimeter. So I've got a tool ready there, and I'm going to get out my 17 millimeter ratchet wrench, and I'm going to finish tightening this up with a 17 millimeter ratchet wrench, and I'm going to hold it with an actual ratchet itself. So ratchet wrench and a hex in the center of the shock, and we're going to tighten it up. That's tight. The top of the piston. So this strut's assembled and ready to go back in the car. So I'm going to take it out of the spring compressor here. So that's how to remove your front strut and spring assembly from a Honda Insight, and how to change the spring over. That's it. I'll see you on the next video.